Our guest this week on Veterans Chronicles is World War II veteran Leslie B. Jones. He served in the United States Navy and served in 3 different theaters. And Les, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Where were you born and raised, sir?
In Southern California.
Yeah.
And I spent most of my time there, but I did move around.
Where were you? What do you remember about when Pearl Harbor was attacked?
It was on a Sunday, and I heard it over the radio. Of course, there was no TV then. And I heard it over the radio, and like everybody says, where in the world is Pearl Harbor? We didn't know anything about it or where it was.
Even on the West Coast, no clue.
Even on the West Coast. Well, and of course, I was still like middle school, or we called it junior high school.
What's your immediate reaction to it?
A little disappointed. Realized the seriousness of it, and that I hope we're doing something correct by retaliating.
So did you eventually enlist or were you drafted?
I enlisted, and I was in my first year of high school, and when I completed my first year, I left high school and enlisted in the Navy.
Did you lie about your age?
No. You could enlist at 17 if you had your parents sign your release. I have a little story about that if you want to go into it.
Sure, go ahead.
After all these years, there's nothing they can do about it anyway. But first, I wanted to go into the Air Corps. They didn't change it until the Air Force until about 1947, I think. So I wanted to go in the Air Corps, and a friend of mine that I was in high school with, his older brother flew a Piper J3 Cub, and they called it an F4, and it was painted Army color. And I still, at that time, I had a love for flying. And so I went into the Air Corps and told him I wanted to enlist and I wanted to learn to fly an F4, which was the Piper J3 Cub. He took one look at me, being 6'4". He said to me, he says, "No, you're too tall, you won't fit in it." Well, after the service, several years later, I still wanted to fly, so I obtained my pilot's license. And the plane that I soloed in was a Piper J3 Cub, the same one that he said that I would never fit in. And that's the first time I realized the government can lie to you.
So you got to choose the Navy then, or
no? I just walked in. I walked out of one, down the hall, walked in the Navy, and he said, "Yeah, we'll take you." And being 17, he said, "Your parents have to sign this." And I said, "Well, my mom is downstairs in the car waiting for me. Can I have her sign it now?" The guy said, "Sure. Here, take this to her and get it signed." So I said, "Okay." I went downstairs, borrowed a pen, put it up on the wall, signed my mom's name, went back upstairs, gave it to him, and he didn't realize that my mom had already been passed away for 7 years. And that's how I got in.
Wow. So then where did you go?
Well, they asked me to report the next day in Los Angeles at the train station, boarded a train and went down to San Diego, and that's where I went through boot camp. And we took a test, and evidently I had a high enough IQ test score that I went into training at Point Loma, which is just down the street from San Diego. And I went into a radar navigation school. And after I received my training there, I got on a train again and went to Houston, Texas, where I picked up my destroyer escort, DE. And I was there early before the ship was completed. Therefore, when they christened the ship, I was already, quote, stationed aboard it. And so I'm one of the original plank owners. And I have a certificate at home for that.
Outstanding. So how long were you there before it was ready to go?
2 months.
Okay.
Approximately. Everything now, I'm 92, going back that many years, everything's approximate to me.
All right, so once you did deploy, where did you go?
From Houston, Texas, went down to Galveston and then out into the Gulf of Mexico. And we headed around Florida and went over to Hamilton, Bermuda. And everybody was brand new on the ship, so they went through a training session so the guys can learn to shoot the guns. Nobody had any experience for that before at all. And so we were there for a while, and after they had experience in shooting guns, I was the third backup. In case we lost the first and second, I had to go out, and because I was in CIC, Combat Information Center, for navigation and radar. So when we completed that, we went up the coast and into Brooklyn Navy Yard. And that was still January of 1944. And I, of course, going into New York was just very emotional. I stood up on the bow and got my first glimpse of the Statue of Liberty. What a thrill. I was fascinated. And we went and tied up at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, which we went through a lot of work on the ship. And we were there for a while, and I had my first experience. I know we have a certain amount of time, but I just thought of 2 or 3 things I could spend a half hour on. My experience in New York and the first things I did. And there were 7 of us, 6 of us. I was the 7th, and I lost them all. And I'm the only, of all the guys I went aboard ship with, I'm the only one left. And all the people I went through high school with, I'm the only one left. And so I run around with younger people now, like 25 years older than me, younger than me. Spent the time in New York, and out of New York, they sent us on our first task force group, ASW, Anti-Submarine Warfare. And our job was to hunt down and sink German U-boats. And it was called Hunter Killer Group. And that's what we did.
What was that like?
It was, there was anxiety involved, and we knew at any minute we could have been sunk with a torpedo. So there was fear. I was afraid because I didn't become a fanatic about it, but we were aware at any minute we could have been torpedoed because we were out to get them and they were out to get us. So it was like hunting a hunting game between us, cat and mouse.
Yeah.
And so the 3 theaters you were telling me about, there was the American theater, the 3 bottom ones. There was the American theater, European theater, Asiatic Pacific theater. I was in all 3. And coming here to Washington, D.C., and meeting at the National World War II Memorial, you meet a lot of guys my age because we're coming from all over and meeting. But you go to common areas, and it's hard to find a World War II veteran. And I'll tell you, you're not going to find one that's been in all 3 theaters.
No, not at all.
And I received these 3 awards from President Franklin D. Roosevelt. And my presidential unit citation I received from Harry S. Truman, President of the United States. So I received those, and when I was in the American theater, the green one in the center, I was into combat 3 different times and received this is combat, my combat ribbon, and the one over here is the presidential unit citation I also received 3 times. A little something interesting, so that people won't forget, in World War II, you would receive a medal, and the ribbon on the medal would be the same color as your ribbon that you can wear. I have all the medals at home, and when you go into one area and you receive one medal, they give you the ribbon and the medal. if you go the second time, they give you a star. So if you see a ribbon and a star, you know they've been there twice. If you see a ribbon and 2 stars, they've been there 3 times. So you can see 3 stars and 2 stars in several of them that I've been in.
Absolutely. How would you describe this cat and mouse game with the German U-boats? Did you ever feel like you were in a rhythm, or is it a day-to-day battle?
Oh, it was day to day, and like the other gentleman said, we did sleep at general quarters often because we'd make contact, and we would constantly hunt them down. So one of the things that I did is help navigate, and we would track the sub as best possible. And after you plotted it several times, you could tell the direction they were going and the speed they were going. And just when you think you've got them organized to where you can make a run to sink them, they'd change their course and speed. So, and they could hear us too. So that was, and we did that constantly.
Any close calls?
Yes. Yeah.
What was that like, or would you rather move on?
Move on, please.
Okay. All right, so what theater did you go to next?
After we won the war in Europe, that was VE Day, Victory in Europe. And I thought then that we'd go home. But the war was still on in the Pacific with the Japs. And so they sent us through the Panama Canal, and we went out to Hawaii for about 3 days. And then from Hawaii, we got supplies, ammo. And then we went out to Guam. And at Guam, we would go out to the individual Jap-held islands. And most of the time, we'd also get up close with a PA system, and a lot of the pilots who either ejected or shot down would be on these islands, and they would be hidden by the locals. So we'd go in with a PA system and let them know we're here, come on out on the beach, and we'd pick them up and take them home. My ship never personally got any, but we would see them go out there with their dinks and pick up the guys and take them back aboard ship. Oh, speaking of pickup, we did once. Right after VE Day, a British Halifax, a British Halifax bomber, light bomber, who bombed France, that was held by the Germans at the time, they were hit by gunfire, and they didn't make it, and they crashed in the ocean. And because we were the closest there by Normandy, we went over and picked them up. And I went down, we had a cargo net that goes down the sound, and you see all those ropes that come like that, the cargo net.
Yeah.
We went down, and I was the first one to reach down and pick up one of the flyers, and he grabbed my hand, he said, "God bless America." And we brought him back aboard ship. And then we dropped them off at Casablanca, Africa.
Oh, wow.
Oh, we hit several places. Here again, Hamilton, Bermuda, Casablanca, Africa, and also Newfoundland. That's where we hit those different places. And then in the meantime, we patrolled the entire North Atlantic. During World War II, we were there because it was called the Battle of the Atlantic. And that was the longest individual battle in the entire World War II, the Battle of the Atlantic.
That's right.
And I was part of it. And they have a memorial for it at the National World War II Memorial. On the Atlantic side, they have Battle of the Atlantic.
Absolutely.
So I was real proud of that. I was part of it.
You should be. Absolutely. What was the key to success in the Battle of the Atlantic?
I wish I had, when I received my 3 awards, if I could read what they said, but it was persistence and unwavering, diligent, constant, pound, 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 and stay on top of it. And our ships would be going over, and at the very first of the war, we were losing the war at the very first. And at the very first, the U-boats were shooting down and sinking more of our ships that they could build fast enough. And they were sending over Liberty ships. They were sending over all kinds of material, food, ammunition. Even our guys were all going over in troop ships, and they were knocking them all off. And we went in there and really shut them down. It took about 2, maybe 3 years, but we shut them completely down. So we did our job.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did. Talk a little bit more about the Pacific Theater. You mentioned picking folks up who needed to be picked up, but what did that entail?
Well, we didn't know why we were there. Had no idea. Just again, they told us what to do and we followed it. But a lot of people don't know. And while we were sitting there, I tried to remember everything had an operation, and they called it everything had operation something, and I forgot the name of it. But we weren't through. The other gentleman said all these ships were over and everything. Well, we were part of it. We had no idea, but we were getting ready to invade Japan in a big way. And bless his heart, President Harry S. Truman dropped 2 bombs. And I'm so glad he did. It was horrible. War is terrible. It's horrible. But we had to do it to stop it. A lot of innocent people were killed, children, women, but it had to be done. And that did stop the war. It stopped. And then we eventually had what they call VJ Day. Now, we were in Europe, so it's VE Day, Victory in Europe. Mm-hmm. But when we won in the Pacific, VJ Day, it was victory over Japan. A lot of people don't know that. And I like to say a lot of things, which I hope I remember to cover now, that after all of us are gone, even in high school today, they say victory in Japan, and it's incorrect.
Right.
I had the opportunity when I was an instructor in college to correct a lot of things.
What did you teach?
Business administration.
Okay.
Go ahead and ask, and eventually when I got out, I can go into that too.
Okay, well, let's take a quick break here. When we come back, we'll pick up much more with Les Jones, U.S. Navy veteran of World War II. Les, you're a California guy.
Yes, born and raised in California.
And so we just heard a little bit ago from a different veteran about the power of coming home to the Golden Gate Bridge. You went out through the Golden Gate Bridge. What was that like?
Well, when I was young, I went up to San Francisco, and they were starting to build the Golden Gate Bridge. Mm-hmm. That was my first experience with it. And then later, they completed it. And living in Southern California, I became interested in a lot of activities. And so when I was up there many times, I remember I've walked across the Golden Gate Bridge. I've jogged across the Golden Gate Bridge over and back. I have ridden my bicycle over and back across the Golden Gate Bridge. I have sailed a sailboat under the Golden Gate Bridge both ways, and I've flown over the Golden Gate Bridge both ways. So it's just kind of a little fun things I've done all of my life.
Yes.
So that's my love with the Golden Gate Bridge.
You can't cross it or go under it or over it more than that. That's impressive. So let's talk about what you did in addition to teaching after you left the U.S. Navy. Did you leave the Navy right after the war?
Yes.
Okay.
And my ship returned to the West Coast, and I lived in Southern California, so I got off in the Long Beach area, San Pedro. And so I got off there. And I'm so glad often when people return and they have their heroes welcome, I am so pleased that they're doing it. But when I came home, no one is at the airport. I hitchhiked home. Nobody was at home, and that was the way I was welcomed. But that's all right. That's another story in my life. But then after I came home, I did a few little odd jobs getting organized. And then I realized the benefits and perks the officers had when I was in the service, and they all had been to some degree into college. So I realized I made a mistake by leaving high school. So I went back and took a few basic courses that were required, but being a veteran, I got a lot of them waived. And then I graduated from high school. I took the entrance exam and I went to University of Southern California, USC. And I have a Bachelor of Science degree in Business Administration and Marketing. Then I went to work in the marketing department. It was then called North American Aviation, and later it was bought out by Boeing. So actually I worked with Boeing in their marketing department, and I negotiated contracts with the Air Force.
Wow.
And then when I left there, I continued and got a little more education, and I went on and became a college associate professor, and then I thoroughly enjoyed working with young people.
Is that also at USC or somewhere else?
No, it was other various college, and usually wherever I might have moved to.
Ah, okay. And you really enjoyed that?
Very much. I enjoyed the students. I didn't like the management too much because we didn't get along. I teach a little different.
Okay. Well, if you didn't like government, management probably isn't the best thing either.
Well, finally the vice principal called me in and wanted to know why so many of my students were getting A's. And I said, ask one of my students. And it's because the way I brought my two sons up. I am so proud of our two sons. They both have done very, very well, and they're all, both of them, excellent Americans. And I'm very proud of them, very proud of them. My wife and I, and my wife really did the best job. I was the bad guy and she was the good guy. But I'm very proud of my two sons.
What do they do?
Oldest one is now a principal of one of the largest middle schools. And my youngest son is a contractor and he builds custom homes. And he got started on that because I used to build our own custom homes. And I put him out digging a big hole so we could put our forms in. And that's how he got started, and he worked with a contractor all the way through. And he became, and he was 12, 14, something like that. He became in love with building. So as soon as he got out of school, he's building and he's doing very well. He's very successful. Both my boys are very content and pleased with their position.
Another thing you got very much involved in are Senior Olympics.
Yes, California Senior Olympics. I been active all of my life. I've stayed busy. And in the California Senior Olympics, I'll try to be brief on this. First, I became involved with cycling because that's one of my hobbies. And of course, starting out, I got some silvers, and then I got some bronze, and then I eventually received a couple of golds in cycling. And then I got more interested and became more involved, and I have gold medals today in cycling, in swimming, both the 25 and 50 meter freestyle, and both the 25 meter and 50 meter in backstroke. And in track and field, I have gold stars, gold medals in shot put, javelin, discus thrower.
Wow.
And running.
That's for the whole state of California you won?
10Ks, yes.
Wow.
And I did 10Ks. Also skiing, I have a gold medal in cross-country skiing. What did I leave out?
You'll have to tell me, but that explains how fit you are at this age.
Well, also I became interested in running, and I went on first doing 10Ks, and you gradually work up. And I finally signed up and I ran the Los Angeles Marathon, 26.2 miles. I did that and finished. I was 75 years old.
Amazing.
I finished. I've been active all of my life in many, many sports.
How long did you stay active in those Olympics? Are you still doing it?
No, I stopped.
Okay.
Somebody told me I got old. And when you do, you start falling apart. And I couldn't stay active. And because I was active, I have neurosurgeons tell me today that if I wasn't so active, right now I'd be talking to you in a wheelchair.
Really?
And when we go home from Washington, I'm scheduled to have another back operation. I'm going to have a lumbar laminectomy fusion. So I'm going to have that done, and when I get better, I'll be going. I'm sitting here right now in pain, so I'll get rid of that.
Well, we certainly pray that that goes well for you.
But I love that, and I haven't even been on my bike for 2 years now. I'm afraid if I fall, it'll tweak my back, and that's it. I am in a wheelchair. But I've had a lot of fun. I've done centuries where I climb on my bike and ride 100 miles.
Amazing.
I used to do those 4 times a year.
Okay.
I'd throw my bike in the back of my pickup truck, and I'd go to a little location where we lived and park my pickup truck and got on my bike, went over to the coast, and I rode all the way down to San Diego. That was 100 miles. Then I'd put my bike on the train in the luggage department, climb on, ride all the way back to that little town again, get my bike off, throw it in my pickup truck, and go home. Like I did that 4 times a year and loved it. I rode my bike at least once a week.
Nice. Just a minute or two left in our conversation, and I want to close on something you told me right before we started speaking, and that's kind of the mindset of the greatest generation. You said you had a friend tell you that you're not from this world.
Well, actually, I'm still with psychiatrists today with the Veterans Administration as a result of my PTSD and my TBI. I still have it, and I'm on meds for it now. And with this psychiatrist, when I talk to him about so many things that I've done, not enough time in the next hour to tell you all of them. And I've had a fun time in my life. And I haven't even gotten into backpacking and hiking yet. I've had records there also, and been flying. But after I talked with a psychiatrist for a while, he told me, he said, he couldn't believe of the activities I've done in my life. He said, you'd have to live 2 lives to accomplish all this. And I just had a lot of fun. And like I tell anybody, I said, well, put $100 down on the table and I'll prove anything you want to know. And so he told me, after learning a lot about me, he finally said to me, he said, Les, he said, you know, you're not really from this world. And because I am different. It's strange, but I'm different.
That's usually not a compliment, but in your case it is. So, congratulations.
Thank you. And one of my biggest hobbies was flying.
Yeah.
And give me a sign when you want. Just do this and I'll stop.
Okay, you got about a minute left before they
Okay,
give me
well,
the hook
I've
here.
loved flying since I was a little kid. And I used to ride my bicycle to our local airport and just sit there and watch the planes take off and land. And one day, one of the pilots and that owned the airplane that I used to admire saw me all the time, so he's finishing up washing his plane. And he said, you help me finish my plane, I'll take you up. Well, in those days, you didn't have to get permission from anybody. You just handshake and do it. And I love those days. But, so we washed it. He threw a helmet to me. He said, get in the back seat. The first flight I ever had in my life, I was 14 years old, and I flew in a Boeing Stearman biplane. Remember the kind of Snoopy had, the 2 wings?
Yeah.
And he had the helmet, I had everything but the scarf. And we had that, and that was my first flight and the first time I flew an airplane. I was 14 years old. So I went on from there. They wouldn't let me do it in the Navy, but I came home and got my license, and I became very involved with flying and exposing to people to fly. And also, I went on and I currently hold 6 national and world records in aviation. I still hold those today, and they haven't been broken.
Amazing. Sir, it's an amazing life. It's an amazing amount of service you've given to our country. Thank you so much for that and for being our guest today.
It was a pleasure. I thoroughly enjoy it, and I want all the people today to tenacity. Do your very best.
Leslie B. Jones is a World War II veteran, served in the U.S. Navy in 3 different theaters, and as you've just heard, a very full life since then. I'm Greg Corombos. This is Veterans Chronicles.